I was carrying the last dresser in from the truck when a voice came from behind me. A voice I hadn't heard in 16 years but still knew better than my own phone number. Guess we're neighbors now. I turned around. It was Grace, 16 years, and she was still looking at me the exact same way she used to back in high school, the way that made me forget what I was holding. The wood in my arms suddenly felt heavier than it should have, and for one long second, neither of us said anything at all. My name is Andre Coleman. I'm 34 years old, and I build furniture for a living. I run a small woodworking shop out of the back of my house in Savannah, Georgia, and I have done for the better part of 6 years. 3 years ago, I got divorced. There were no kids, which people always tell me was a blessing, and maybe it was, but it also meant there was nothing left to hold on to once she was gone. Just a house that felt too big and too quiet, and a version of myself I had to rebuild one board at a time. I mean that literally. When my ex-wife moved out, I stripped the floors of that house down to the original pine and refinished every single plank myself. I rebuilt the kitchen cabinets. I sanded the banister until my hands blistered. People probably thought I was losing my mind, working on a house nobody else was going to live in with me. But I wasn't doing it for anybody else. I was doing it because wood doesn't lie to you. It warps, it splits, it tells you exactly what it needs. People are different. People smile at you for 2 years and then tell you they never really loved you at all. So I built things instead. I built a life that was small and quiet in mine. I woke up early. I worked with my hands. I closed the shop at 6, and I didn't let much else in. I told myself that was enough. Most nights, it was. I did start a little page online for the shop. Nothing serious, just photos of finished pieces, a coffee table here, a bookshelf there. A few hundred people followed it, enough to sell a piece or two a month. I never thought much about who was actually looking at those photos. I found out much later that an old friend from high school had sent one of those posts to Grace, months before she ever called off her engagement. I didn't know that at the time. She did. So, when the moving truck pulled up next to my house that afternoon, I had no idea what I was walking into. I just heard the engine cut off, heard doors slam, heard boxes being unloaded, and figured some new family was moving into the house that had been empty for almost a year. I went back to carrying my own boxes in, minding my own business, the way I did everything those days. I did not expect Grace Bellamy to step out of that truck. I did not expect 16 years to collapse into a single second the way they did, and I definitely didn't expect the quiet, careful life I had built for myself to start coming apart at the seams, one conversation at a time, starting that very afternoon. My neighborhood is the kind of place where everybody waves from their porch, but nobody really knows each other's business, which suited me fine. Live oaks lined the street, heavy with moss, and most mornings I'd walk out to the shop before the heat set in. Coffee in one hand, sawdust already in my lungs by 7. The shop itself was nothing fancy. A single room out back with good light. A workbench I built with my own 2 hands the first month after the divorce, and shelves lined with half-finished projects I never seemed to run out of. It smelled like pine and linseed oil, and some mornings that smell was the only thing that made sense to me. I kept to a routine because routine was safe. Wake up, coffee, work until the light got good. Work until it got bad again. Close up, dinner alone, repeat. I told myself I liked it that way. Some days I even believed it. I had friends, sure, guys I'd grab a beer with on a Friday, but nobody who really got close enough to ask the hard questions. I preferred it that way. Easier to keep a life small than to risk watching it fall apart again. I used to think I had forgotten her. Turns out I was just good at pretending. The first time Grace knocked on my door, it wasn't really about anything. She said her porch light had gone out and she didn't know where the fuse box was in her new place. And could I take a look? I could have told her to call an electrician. Instead, I grabbed a flashlight and walked next door in the dark, telling myself it was just a neighborly thing to do, the kind of thing anybody would do for anybody else. It wasn't the fuse box. It was a loose bulb. She knew that. I think we both knew that. Standing there in her kitchen with the light flickering back on, neither of us saying much, both of us pretending the silence between us was comfortable and not loaded with 16 years of things unsaid. After that, the visits kept happening. She needed a fence board replaced. She needed a bookshelf that would fit into an oddly shaped corner of her living room. She needed a hand carrying a table in from her car, even though I watched her lift heavier things than that without blinking. I built her the bookshelf myself, took my time with it, sanded every edge twice, because some part of me wanted an excuse to keep coming back, and some part of her, I think now, wanted the same thing. We started sitting on her porch some evenings, coffee going cold in our hands while the sun dropped behind the oaks. She'd ask about the shop, about what I was working on, and she'd listen the way she used to in high school, like whatever I said actually mattered to her. I remembered that about her. I remembered a lot about her, if I'm honest, more than I let myself admit at the time. She remembered things too. Small things. She remembered I drank my coffee black, no sugar, no cream, a detail I hadn't mentioned to another living soul since I was 18 years old. She remembered I used to doodle furniture designs in the margins of my notebooks in class instead of paying attention. She remembered the exact bench in the school courtyard where I used to eat lunch alone most days, because I was never much for crowds even back then. "You still do that thing," she said one evening, nodding at my hands, which had been absently sketching a shape into the condensation on my glass. "The drawing thing. You did that in 10th grade English the whole year." I looked down at my glass like I'd been caught at something. "You noticed that?" "I noticed a lot of things," she said, and there was something in the way she said it, quiet and careful, like she was choosing her words around the edges of a bigger truth she wasn't ready to hand over yet. I told myself it was nothing. People remember things about old classmates sometimes. It didn't have to mean what some small, hopeful part of me wanted it to mean. But then there were the other moments. The evening I looked up from my workbench and saw her standing at her window, just standing there, watching the shop light glow through the dark, not moving, not pretending to be doing anything else. I didn't say anything. I didn't wave. I just let the moment sit there between us, longer than it needed to, because some part of me didn't want to break it. There was another night. Later, when I walked past her window and caught a glimpse of something small and wooden sitting on the sill, angled just so, like it had been placed there on purpose, like it mattered. I only saw it for a second before she noticed me looking and pulled the curtain shut, quick, almost embarrassed. I told myself I hadn't really seen what I thought I'd seen. I told myself a lot of things that summer. We fell into something that felt less like friendship and more like two people circling the edge of a conversation. Neither one of us was brave enough to start. She'd ask me questions that seemed casual on the surface, but sat with more weight underneath. Did I ever think about high school? Did I ever wonder what happened to people from back then? Did I ever regret not saying things I should have said? I gave her careful answers. Safe ones. The kind of answers a man gives when he's spent 3 years teaching himself not to want anything too badly. Because wanting things too badly is how you end up hollowed out on a kitchen floor at 2 in the morning, which is where I ended up more than once after my marriage fell apart. But some nights, walking back to my own house after sitting on her porch for 2 hours longer than I meant to, I'd catch myself smiling for no reason at all. I'd catch myself thinking about what she said, replaying it, turning it over like a piece of wood I was trying to figure out the grain of. I hadn't let myself feel anything close to that in 3 years. I wasn't sure I was ready to admit I was feeling it now. There was an evening in late July when the heat finally broke and a soft rain came through, the kind that doesn't really cool anything down so much as it just makes the air feel heavier and closer. We sat under her porch overhang and watched it fall, and she was quiet for a long time, longer than usual, and I let her be quiet, because some silences don't need filling. "I used to wonder about you," she finally said, not looking at me, looking out at the rain instead. "Back then, I used to wonder what would have happened if either of us had ever said anything." My chest did something complicated. "Said anything about what?" She smiled, but it wasn't a full smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they're not ready to finish a sentence. "Nothing. Forget it." I didn't forget it. I thought about it for days. I thought about the way she'd looked at me when she said it, like the question had been sitting in her for a long, long time, waiting for the right porch, the right rain, or the right almost moment to finally get halfway out into the open air. I told myself it was just old friends catching up. I told myself a lot of things were just coincidence. The coffee order, the doodles, the way she seemed to end up wherever I was without either of us really planning it. But how many coincidences does it take before you have to call it something else? How many small, quiet details does one person have to remember about another before it stops being memory and starts being something closer to devotion. Some Saturday mornings, she'd walk over with 2 coffees before I'd even opened the shop doors. And we'd sit on the tailgate of my truck and talk about nothing important, the kind of nothing that somehow felt like everything. She asked once what I'd have said to her back in high school, if I'd ever gotten up the nerve to say anything at all. I gave her a joke instead of an answer, something easy, something that let both of us laugh and move past it without either of us having to admit how close we were standing to the truth. I noticed the way she'd linger in doorways a beat longer than she needed to. I noticed the way she'd find a reason to touch my arm when she laughed, quick and light, gone before I could fully register it happened. I noticed, and I told myself not to read too much into any of it, because I had been wrong about a woman's intentions before, badly wrong, and I wasn't in a hurry to be wrong again. But there was one evening, near the end of summer, when she walked me to the edge of my own driveway after dinner on her porch, and we stood there a long moment under the streetlight, neither one of us saying goodnight. The cicadas were loud that night, loud enough to fill every silence we didn't. She looked at me like she was working up to something, some sentence sitting right behind her teeth, and for one heartbeat I thought she might actually say it. She didn't. She just said goodnight, soft, and walked back toward her porch, and I stood there in my driveway for longer than I want to admit, watching her go, feeling something in my chest that I hadn't let myself feel in 3 long years. I didn't have an answer yet. I just knew that for the first time in 3 years, I was looking forward to something. And that scared me more than anything Colton Reeves would end up saying to me a few weeks later. Colton Reeves showed up on a Thursday afternoon in a car that cost more than most people's houses, and he parked it right in front of Grace's place like he still had every right to be there. I was out in my own yard when he pulled up, close enough to hear the engine cut, close enough to see him step out in that easy, practiced way men like him move, like the whole world is supposed to slow down and watch. I didn't know who he was at first. I just knew he walked up Grace's steps like he owned them, and I watched her open the door with an expression I hadn't seen on her before, something tight and careful, the look of a person bracing for a conversation they didn't ask for. I went back to my own work, told myself it wasn't my business, but an hour later, he was standing at the edge of my driveway instead of hers, hands in his pockets, looking at my shop like he was pricing it. "You must be the neighbor," he said, like the word tasted a little sour in his mouth. "Colton." Grace and I go back a ways. I wiped my hands on a rag and didn't offer one back. Andre." He said my name slow, like he was filing it away for later. "You build furniture, huh? That's a nice little hobby." I let that sit. I'd been called worse by better men than him. He smiled, the kind of smile that never made it to his eyes. "Look, I'm not trying to start anything. I just figured somebody ought to give you a heads up, one man to another. Grace is a good woman. Beautiful, smart, all of it, but she's got a pattern. She gets close to people, gets them comfortable, and then when they stop being useful to her, she's gone. I know because I lived it. That's so. I was the one who ended it, if you're wondering. Called off the whole thing myself, once I saw who she really was underneath all that charm." He said it easy, practiced, like he'd told the story so many times it had worn smooth, like a stone in his pocket. "I just don't want to see another good man go through what I went through." I didn't say much back to him. I learned a long time ago that men who need you to know how much they were wronged usually have a reason for making sure the story gets told their way first. But something about the way he said it landed anyway, found a crack in me I didn't know was still there. Some old bruise from my own marriage that never fully healed. He wasn't done. Before he left, he pulled something out of his jacket pocket, a photograph, worn soft at the edges like it had been handled a lot. He held it out just long enough for me to see it clearly before tucking it away again. It was Grace and me, 17 years old, standing near the school gym, a picture I didn't even remember being taken. "She kept this in her old apartment," he said. "Framed it even. Funny thing to keep, don't you think? A photo of some kid from high school. Almost like she planned this whole thing out a long time ago." He smiled again, that same cold smile, and got back in his car, and drove off like he'd just dropped a stone in still water and wanted to watch the ripples spread. I stood there in my driveway a long time after he left. I want to tell you I didn't let it get to me. I want to tell you I was smarter than that that 3 years of rebuilding myself board by board had made me steady enough not to crumble at the first man who came around trying to knock me over. But the truth is, it got to me plenty. Because I already knew, somewhere underneath all my careful denial, that Grace remembered things about me she shouldn't have been able to remember by accident. I already knew the coffee order, and the doodles, and the courtyard bench weren't coincidences. Colton didn't tell me anything I hadn't already halfway suspected. He just gave the suspicion a shape I didn't want it to have. For the next few days, I pulled back. I stopped walking over in the evenings. I kept the shop door closed even when the weather was good enough to leave it open. When Grace knocked, twice, I told her through the door that I was busy, which wasn't true, and we both knew it wasn't true, and I let that lie sit between us anyway because it was easier than the alternative. I told myself I was protecting myself. I told myself I'd already been fooled once by somebody who made me feel wanted right up until the day she wasn't there anymore, and I wasn't going to let it happen twice. I told myself Colton might be a lot of things, but he had no reason to lie about something like that, not with a photograph in his hand as proof. Colton came back 2 more times that week, always with some thin excuse about needing to talk to Grace about paperwork or a storage unit, or something equally forgettable, and both times he made a point of walking past my shop slow, giving me a nod like we were 2 men who understood each other now. I hated how much that nod worked on me. I hated that some small, wounded part of me wanted to believe him, because believing him meant I wouldn't have to risk anything at all. It meant I could go right back to the safe, small life I'd built, the one where nobody got close enough to hurt me again. Grace tried a few more times to talk to me that week. She left a note on my door once, just a few lines, asking if everything was okay, if she'd done something wrong. I read it twice and then folded it into my back pocket and didn't answer it, which was its own kind of answer, the cruelest kind, the kind that doesn't even give a person the dignity of a real conversation. I caught her watching me from her porch one evening while I was loading scrap wood into my truck. She didn't say anything. She just watched, arms crossed, something unreadable in her face, and I felt the weight of that look follow me the rest of the night. Into the shop, into my empty kitchen, into a bed I didn't sleep well in. A part of me wanted to march over there and ask her straight out about the photograph, about Colton, about all of it. But another part of me, the part that had spent 3 years learning how to survive on my own, told me it was safer to just let the distance grow, safer to let the fence between our yards mean something again, instead of the almost nothing it had become over the summer. I told myself that was strength. Looking back now, I know it was just fear wearing strength's clothes. By the end of that week, the silence between our 2 houses had a weight to it, heavy and humid, like the air right before a storm finally breaks. I didn't know yet that the storm was coming from a different direction entirely. I didn't know that Colton's version of the story was about to fall apart under its own weight, and that when it did, it would take more than an old photograph to explain what it left behind. She came to the shop just after midnight, 9 days after Colton first showed up. I heard the gravel under her feet before I saw her, and when I looked up from my workbench, she was standing in the doorway with something small cradled in both hands, held against her like it might break if she loosened her grip even a little. It was the box. My box. The one I'd carved in my last year of high school and never once found the courage to give her. "I need to say some things," she said, "and I need you to just let me say them before you decide anything." I set my tools down and didn't say a word, because some part of me already knew this was a conversation I'd been circling for 16 years without ever knowing it. She told me she'd kept the box since senior year, that a mutual friend had slipped it to her not long after I'd left it behind, half finished, in a moment of panic I still remembered too clearly to be proud of. She told me she never forgot it, never forgot me, even through college, even through the years after, even through an engagement that looked right on paper and felt wrong every single day she wore the ring. "I saw a post from your shop months before I called off the wedding," she said. "A friend sent it to me, not even thinking anything of it, and I sat there staring at a photo of a coffee table for 20 minutes because I couldn't stop thinking about you. That's when I knew something in my life wasn't where it was supposed to be." I asked her, carefully, about the house, about whether moving in next door had been an accident at all. She didn't flinch from the question. "No," she said, "it wasn't an accident. I looked up the neighborhood after I saw that post. When the house next to yours came up, I told myself it was a coincidence worth chasing. I know how that sounds. I'm not sorry for it. Then I told her about Colton. About the photograph, about the story he told, about the version of events where he was the one who walked away. Something in her face went very still and very tired, the look of a person repeating a story they never wanted to have to tell twice. He tells people that because it's easier for him than the truth, she said. The truth is, I found out he'd forged documents to pull an investment out of my family, using my name, without my knowledge. I found the paperwork myself. I ended it that same week. He spent every year since telling people a different version because his version lets him keep his pride. Mine just left me with the truth. I stood there holding 100 different feelings at once, and underneath all of them was something that felt almost like relief. The kind of relief you feel when a shape you've been squinting at in the dark finally resolves into something you recognize. I kept this, she said again, holding the box out toward me, not because I'm sentimental. I kept it because some part of me never stopped hoping I'd get the chance to stand in front of you and finally say what I should have said back then. I took the box from her hands. It was rougher than I remembered, the carving uneven in places, the work of a boy who didn't yet trust his own two hands the way I trust them now. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I just held it. And then I reached out and put my hand over hers and let it stay there, longer than a simple gesture needed to last. Some truths arrive 16 years late, I finally said, and they still make it in time. She almost laughed, the sound catching somewhere between relief and disbelief. And for the first time since Colton's car had pulled up in front of her house, the silence between us didn't feel like a wall anymore. It felt like the beginning of something neither of us was in a hurry to rush through. We stayed in that shop a long while, the two of us, the box sitting between us on the workbench like a third presence in the room. She told me things I'd never known, about the year after graduation when she almost drove to my old address just to see if I still lived there, about the way she used to scroll past old class photos looking for my face in the background of pictures that weren't even about me. I told her things too, about the marriage that fell apart, about how much of myself I'd boarded up afterward, one plank at a time, until I'd built a life so quiet I sometimes forgot what it felt like to want something. I'm not asking you to forget any of that, she said. I'm not asking you to trust me overnight, just because I finally told you the truth. I know trust doesn't work that way. I just didn't want to let one more day pass with you thinking I was someone I'm not. I told her I needed time, and she nodded like she'd expected exactly that answer, like she'd already made peace with however long it might take. There was something steady in the way she said it, no urgency, no pressure, just an honesty that asked for nothing in return except the chance to keep being honest. Before she left that night, she paused at the shop door and looked back at me one more time. For what it's worth, she said, I'm glad it was you who moved into that life next to mine, even if it takes a while for you to be glad of the same thing. I watched her walk back across the yard toward her own porch light, and I stood there in the doorway of my shop for a long time after she'd gone inside, the box still warm from both our hands, sitting heavy and honest on the bench behind me. We didn't rush anything after that night, and I think that's exactly what saved it. There was no dramatic declaration, no grand gesture meant to erase 16 years in a single afternoon, just small things, done quietly, done consistently, the kind of things that build trust back up slower than they tear it down. I built her a reading chair that fit the exact angle of her porch, the kind of thing that takes real measuring, real care, the kind of thing you can't fake your way through. She started walking over on Saturday mornings with 2 coffees before I'd even opened the shop. No explanation needed anymore, just the simple fact of her showing up, again and again, until showing up stopped feeling like a question and started feeling like a promise. Word got back to us, through a mutual friend, that Colton had lost his job about 2 months after that night in the shop. The story of the forged investment documents finally caught up to him, made its way through the right circles, and by the time it was done, his name wasn't worth much in this town anymore. He left Savannah quietly, the same way he'd tried to leave his lies behind him for years, and neither of us spent much time thinking about him after that. Some people only matter for as long as it takes the truth to catch up to them. The fence between our 2 yards came down about 6 months after Grace moved in, though it happened slow, the way most real things do. I started with the far corner post, the one that had been leaning for years anyway, giving myself an easy excuse to keep going. Grace stood nearby while I worked, not really helping, just watching, handing me tools when I reached for them, present in a way that felt like its own kind of promise. Board by board, the line between our two properties disappeared until what used to be two separate yards became one shared patch of ground, with a garden neither of us had planned, but both of us kept tending anyway. "You know, my mother asked when she gets to meet the woodworking neighbor," Grace said one evening, laughing a little at herself. "I think she already has opinions, good opinions or bad ones. Ask me again after you meet her." There were still small moments of hesitation along the way, the kind that come from two people who've both been burned before and know exactly how much a careless step can cost. She paused once, before introducing me to her family at a small gathering, just a beat too long, and I noticed it the way you notice a hairline crack in a piece of wood before it ever becomes a real problem. I didn't push. I let her find her own way to the introduction, and when she finally made it, her hand found mine without me having to reach for it first. There was an evening, a few weeks later, when I almost said something important, some sentence I'd been carrying around in my chest for days, half-formed and heavy. I stopped myself at the last second, not out of fear this time, but because I wanted to say it right, when the moment had earned it, instead of rushing it just to relieve the pressure of carrying it around. Some things are worth being patient for. I was starting to understand that in a way I never had before. The garden between our houses filled in slowly over that fall, tomatoes first, then something climbing along a trellis I built for her. Then flowers neither of us could name but both of us liked well enough to keep watering. Some mornings I'd come out to the shop and find her already out there, coffee in hand, watching the light come up over the oaks, and she'd look over at me with an expression I was starting to recognize, something steady and sure, nothing like the guarded look she used to wear back when Colton's shadow still hung over both of us. I stopped waking up bracing for the day to go wrong. I stopped treating quiet mornings like something to survive instead of something to enjoy. Somewhere in those 6 months, without either of us marking the exact day it happened, I stopped being a man who was recovering from something and became a man who was simply, quietly, building towards something else instead. I didn't say it out loud yet, what I was feeling, but I didn't need to say it every day for it to be true. Some things you build slowly, the same way you build good furniture, with patience, with care, trusting that the joints will hold because you took the time to cut them right the first time. I wasn't in a hurry anymore. I'd already learned what happens when you rush the things that matter, and I wasn't interested in learning that lesson twice. By the time the leaves started turning that October, our shared garden looked less like something we'd stumbled into and more like something we'd chosen on purpose together. Grace planted a row of bulbs along the border one weekend, telling me they wouldn't bloom until spring, and I remember thinking how strange it was to plant something you wouldn't see the reward of for months, and how she didn't seem bothered by that at all. She said good things were worth planting even when you had to wait for them. I started noticing how differently I moved through my own days. I used to close the shop at 6 and eat dinner alone in a kitchen that echoed a little too much. Now, more evenings than not, there were 2 plates on the table, 2 voices filling that same kitchen, and the echo I used to sit with every night had quietly disappeared somewhere along the way without either of us announcing it. Her family came to visit in November, and I met her mother on the porch of the very house Grace had moved into that first summer, the same porch where I'd first fixed a bulb that didn't actually need fixing. Her mother shook my hand, studied me a long moment, and then smiled in a way that told me Grace had already said more about me than either of them let on. "So you're the one who builds things," she said. I told her I hoped I was building something worth the wait. She seemed satisfied with that answer, and so was I. Grace and I never talked much about Colton after that fall. He became a name from a story that used to matter and didn't anymore. The way old splinters stop aching once the wood around them heals over. What mattered instead were the small, steady things. The chair on her porch that fit her exactly right. The coffee on Saturday mornings. The garden that neither of us had to explain to the other because we'd built it side by side, one Saturday at a time, learning each other's pace instead of forcing our own. I didn't regret the 16 years it took to get here. Not anymore. Some wood needs that long to season properly before it's ever ready to be used for anything worth keeping. It's late autumn now, and I'm sitting in my shop with the morning light coming in slow through the window, my hand resting on that old wooden box, The rough one, the one I carved when I was 17 and too scared to hand it over. Next to it sits a new box I finished last week. Smaller, the joints tighter, the edges cleaner than anything I could have made back then. It isn't open yet. Grace doesn't know it exists. She's out in the garden right now, on the other side of that same window, not knowing I'm watching her the way she used to watch me, back before either of us said a word about any of it. For years, I avoided love. I told myself safety mattered more than happiness, that a quiet life was a life protected. But it turns out the only thing I ever really needed to avoid was the version of myself from 16 years ago, the one who didn't have the courage to say what he felt. I'm looking at Grace through that window now, my hand still resting on that new box, and I know I'm not going to let silence win one more time. Have you ever kept a feeling quiet for years, never letting it out into the open air? And if that person walked back into your life tomorrow, would you stay silent again, or would you finally tell them the truth? If this story meant something to you, leave a like, subscribe for more stories like this one, and tell me in the comments, do you think love can ever really be too late?